here we are, back again with another GreatJoy lens, this time the 85mm T2.9 1.8x full-frame anamorphic lens. This 85mm was provided by GreatJoy for review. Still going to be honest about it, but pretty positive things to say overall, and I prefer to give more of an overview based on my experiences with the lens, more than a straight, should you get it or not. That's really up to you. It's pretty subjective, I think. This is a prototype, so the image may change a little bit by the time you get your hands on one. I have the set here in PL mount with blue flares, and happy to say with a 85mm, the flares are back. They're still quite subdued compared to, other cheaper anamorphic options, but personally, I think that is a good thing. It's nice to have a bit of variety. Now, this lens looks like part of the set from a visual point of view. Colors match quite well. Image is fairly sharp for an anamorphic lens. Modern, clean look is probably how I would describe it. It looks like it belongs in this set from an image point of view, which is important, I think. And you can see they all look very similar. Maybe the 85 is a touch warm. None of it's a big deal. You can correct it all in post. It's all pretty good stuff. Externally, the lenses all look very similar. The 85 is a slight bit taller, but the focus and aperture rings are all in the same place if you are going to be putting this onto a camera with a wireless follow focus. In terms of what has changed, the 50mm launched with a variable squeeze. Very beautiful lens, and for the price point, not too much to complain about, but that squeeze change definitely made things a little bit complicated. I just always found myself shooting with diopters, especially to get close-ups. The 35mm came along, fairly constant squeeze, very little focus breathing. It sort of solved that problem, but you lost the lens flares. Personally, for the type of shooting that we do here, wasn't too much of a big deal, especially for a wide-angle lens like this. But of course, sometimes you do want a bit of flare, and it's a little bit too wide, the 35, to use with streak filters. Now, I did find that you can put a piece of fishing gut or something like that, and that will give you flares if you need them. But obviously, you're not going to want to leave it like that. Or maybe you do, but I certainly don't. But so along comes the 85mm. Flares are back. Image, great. Focus throw, very comparable. Build qualities, very comparable between the three lenses. They've kept the focus markings in feet and meters this time, just like with the 35. All the lenses have an 82mm filter thread. Interchangeable mount again, so this is a PL and EF mount. It's fantastic. It's probably the one that I recommend getting. They also make it in a lot of mirrorless mounts, including L mount, E mount, RF mount, pretty much any mount under the sun. This model is going to come with blue and amber flares again, and they say they might make a third model with no flares. Now, what I did notice while shooting with this lens is that with the 35 and the 50, you could never really get those close-ups we were after. We shoot full frame here a lot, and even shooting 16:9 full frame of 50mm 1.8x Anamorphic is going to have the field of view roughly of a 35mm lens, which is going to be even more noticeable because you're not going to be chopping the top and bottom off like you would to get scope out of a spherical lens. So that's a fairly wide-angle look, in my opinion. With the 85, however, you can really get those close-ups. What I wasn't necessarily expecting, but it makes sense mathematically, is that the difference between the 50 and the 85 from a field of view perspective is bigger than the jump between the 35 to the 50. The 85 gets a lot closer in a very positive way, because it means that we have not needed to use diopters with the 85mm to get close-ups, whereas with the 50 and the 35, if you needed a close-up, you needed a diopter, which is not uncommon for an anamorphic lens, and especially with the 50, it's maybe a good thing because of the variable squeeze, because you can focus to infinity and still get your close-up. But yeah, you don't need that with the 85. It works out of the box, which makes it a pleasure to shoot with, because the squeeze is consistent, very little focus breathing, and you don't need diopters for close-ups. When we're running around shooting anamorphic, generally speaking, we'll hang around the 75 to 85mm range the whole day, and very occasionally we'll swap out to something wider, normally closer to 35-40mm. So we've been waiting a long time for this 85, and I can say safely that, yeah, for the most part, we would be shooting with the 85, and it's got a very, very pleasant look. When the 35 came out, we said that that's our favorite. We prefer it. And the 85 has done the same. This is now our favorite. We love it. Great separation that you get with an 85mm. I mean, a T2.9 may not sound that shallow, but when you consider that you're not cropping in or anything, you're getting a larger portion of the image that's usable compared to a spherical 85mm, and you're going to be closer to your subject. So, I've noticed some curious design quirks with this lens that I actually think are really cool. When they went from the variable squeeze of the 50 to the 35, there were some concerns about how they were doing it, I suppose, having two anamorphic elements at the front and back, and I think they've done the same with this one. However, I think that they've put a false aperture behind the aperture, which is also about 1.3x, which is going to add to your anamorphic character, because obviously, for those that don't know, your front element contributes to the look, which this has a front element, and then the rear element, which this also has, does not contribute to the anamorphic look. So I think it's very smart of them to separate them like this for the constant squeeze, and then put a oval insert essentially behind the aperture. That means that as you stop down, you may lose some anamorphic quality, but for us anyways, T2.9, we're going to be trying to shoot wide open a lot of the time. Generally speaking, with anamorphics, we're shooting fairly wide open if we can. But I just think that that's a really clever idea that they've come up with to sort of give you the best of both worlds. You know, you get your anamorphic look and you get your constant squeeze factor, which is pretty wild to think about. In conclusion, the 85mm completes the set. If you can only get two of the lenses, I would suggest these two. And that is just because then you've got your wide angle and your close-up lens and it's done, you know? Obviously the 50 is beautiful as well, but from my point of view, I think the lenses that we're going to be using most of the time is probably the 85 and then occasionally the 35. And obviously that's a subjective thing, but that is my personal opinion. Obviously, if you want to pick up the 50, it's a great option to have. And if you had to choose one lens, I suppose it really comes down to what you need. Think about whether or not you shoot a lot of wide angle stuff. Obviously, then you're going to want 35. If you are on a Super 35 camera, the 85 may be too tight for you as your single lens choice option. You may want to go back to the 50mm for that. But yeah, I think that covers everything. Thanks for watching.